Hi everyone, my name is Charlie and today is the beginning of another reading vlog. I would like to talk about how my reading has gone since finishing Barnaby Rudge. So yesterday I went to work without any clear idea of what I wanted to read after finishing that book, because I knew that I didn't want to read something big again, something epic. I wanted to go to one of the shorter books, maybe something that would have a sense of urgency and immediacy and would be the complete converse to Barnaby Rudge, which is a bit of a dense historical novel, almost literary if we're going to talk in those terms. So my first thought had been to either go to Anthony Trollope with Dr. Wortle's School or even go to Lois the Witch by Elizabeth Gaskell. This one because it's only 80 pages and I thought I could probably read that in just over an hour and it might feel a bit like a palate cleanser. But then yesterday, whilst I was at work, somebody donated the Golden Primer, or Primer, the Golden Primer, I don't know, which was an enchanting example of Victorian book illustration by one of the foremost artists and illustrators of the period, Walter Crane. This was something to help children learn their alphabet. I don't know who Professor J.M.D. Meiklejohn is, but he had something to do with it. And I thought this looked like a very nice little book. When I saw this book, I didn't read any of it. I just looked at the pages, saw the way that it was formatted and thought that it must be a collection of children's poetry to help children learn to read in the Victorian era. That is not the case. It is basically a jumble of words on the page, emphasising what certain sounds are so that children can grasp those sounds. And from the instructions within the introduction, I think that maybe the people who were reading it to the children were supposed to come up with some sort of story themselves, including all of those words. So I've inadvertently ended up fulfilling Katie's prompt of reading something that wasn't a novel, but I did it by accident because I thought that it was going to be something different than what it is. It's got some brilliant images within inside, and that was great to look at, but there isn't really any literary worth here. And in terms of Lois the Witch, I read the first chapter and I fear that it's going to go the same way of Tessa the D'Urbervilles from what I've read, and I just don't want to be dealing with that sort of tragedy. So I went to my room and I'm looking for something to read. And I remember King Solomon's Mines by H. Rider Haggard. And I have been meaning to read this one since I found out what the book was actually about maybe a year ago. I included it on last year's Victober TBR in any case, and I never got around to it. And this is a Victorian adventure story, and I've seen it likened to Indiana Jones. That is how I can recall finding out what this book was about, because I googled looking for adventure stories like Indiana Jones and this was recommended. I inherited a few of these Reader's Digest editions upon my granddad's death. It was the way of a lot of things. When I was a child, if an elderly relative died, I just got given all of their books. And King Solomon's Mines, I mistakenly thought was a religious text. I don't know why I thought that, because I can't say as my grandparents were particularly religious. But that's one of the reasons that I've never gone near it, never bothered looking up what it was about. And that is to my downfall, because I think that I am going to rather like this book. There is an urgency to it. It's written rather simplistically. This piece of card that features information about the book and the writer was slotted in at page 53. And I know that my granddad used to use these as bookmarks. And part of me was thinking, is that the place that he reached before he went and died 23 years ago? Did my grandfather DNF this book at page 53? I mean, technically, if he got that far, then yeah, he definitely DNF'd it because he ain't going to be starting it now. Or did he just thrust that piece of paper back in there when he'd finished the book, not caring where it landed? I don't know. But while I've been thinking about this book, I've just been thinking, well, I've got to get to page 53. Then it'll be like almost meeting where my grandfather ended this book. You know, because we attribute meaning where there is none. I'm beginning to question whether we need to say this with every Victorian novel, but it does exhibit some language and some opinions which were prominent at the time and can be rather uncomfortable to read as a modern reader. And as a lover of elephants, I particularly despised chapter 4 of this book. Whether it was written well or not, I did not care to see these people taking a second out of their journey to go and fell elephants. Another issue I have is the fact that that chapter and a lot of this book has Alan Quatermain saying that he won't tell you about a specific part of the story because it's not important to the narrative. Why was stopping what you were doing to go and shoot innocent elephants anything to do with the story? Why was it important? Why was it vital? Why did I need you to do that? It kind of upset me, but at the same time, it's an incredibly fast read. I do like the plain language. I do like that we got straight into the plot. We know what King Solomon's mines are, and we know why these characters are on a quest to find them. We will see how things go. I am in work tomorrow, and then I have Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday before I'm away next week, and anything that I read, I will have to finish on Sunday, because when I get to Whitby next week, I intend to read a book that is nothing to do with the Victorians and a different Victorian title. So there we have it. Now I'm going to go downstairs, I'm going to finish my cup of tea, and I'm going to do a bit of reading. It's Wednesday and I am 100 pages into King Solomon's Mines by H. Rider Haggard. It's continued down the vein of doing things that I cannot really abide, such as the slaughtering of animals just for the sake of it, and not necessarily recognising that they are actual living beings. They shot one animal just to prove how a gun works. Also not necessarily a fan of the way that the Kukwana people are discussed within here. At least I think that's how you pronounce their name. They've entered into this land and found these people who've been hidden for thousands upon thousands of years, and they're ruled by a bit of a tyrannical leader. But it's almost like white supremacy going on in the way that the narrator is behaving in here, and the way that they talk down to these people as though they aren't very knowledgeable. And I understand that this was perhaps how people behaved and believed at the time. I think that just because this work is set in Africa, in some sort of nondescript area where we're constantly hearing about Sheba's breasts, 2 mountains, that it lends itself to having somewhat racist, ill-informed language that leaves a modern reader feeling uncomfortable. I can see the adventure aspect, and I can understand why this would appeal to readers reading when this book first came out, and also continuing into the 20th century, especially when we look at adventure films coming out during the 1950s and 60s. As I say, like, I went to this book because I saw that it was a precursor to Indiana Jones, and I can see that. As I'm reading it, I'm wondering if this is also a precursor to The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, those quest novels where the characters are searching for a physical object as well as
themselves, that sort of thing. And it is pacey and a fast read. And, you know, Alan Quatermain has gone on and been enlivened in other pieces of media that I have enjoyed. It's just, there's a lot in here that makes me uncomfortable. Yeah, I'm reading it because it fulfills the prompt for reading some sort of Victorian fantastical fiction. It's not the most fantastical book in the world, it's just that we've recently been introduced to a witch who is, again, described as something of the grotesque fashion. I don't know whether that feeds into this idea of depicting these people in an unfavourable fashion. It's a tough one to navigate. I went to this because in Lois the Witch we were seeing some racist attitudes towards the Native American people. I come to King Solomon's Mines, and it's just wherever I go in these works, it's further racism. It's a tough one, especially since this character keeps talking about how they're a bit more peaceable and that sort of thing, and then they go on and do this. But still, I'm hoping to finish it today, and then I think Thursday, Friday, I'm going to catch up with Hester, because I've realised I am far enough behind now that I can read great big chunks and catch up with people. And as I said at the beginning of Victober, the way that I like to read is reading in bigger chunks than trying to read 2 chapters a day. It doesn't work for me. I end up getting lost, and it makes the story feel piecemeal in my mind. Whereas if I read a solid block, then I feel more fulfilled doing it that way. So that's my plan for the rest of the week. Let's see if we actually get to do that.
It's Friday, and I've now finished reading King Solomon's Mines by H. Rider Haggard, and unfortunately it isn't going to be making its way into my new favourites. It is an incredibly pacey read, and I had been told about this, that I would be able to get through it rather quickly. Indeed, I only ended up reading it somewhat slower than I anticipated because I'd mistakenly got it into my head that this book was 250 pages. And when it got to Wednesday night and I'd read a certain number, I thought, well, I'll leave 50 pages for tomorrow. And last night when I got there, I actually only had 20 pages left. Some of the main detractions for me are the battle scenes that take place when Alan Quatermain and his companions make it to this lost world. Now, firstly, a lot of people have cited this as the first example of the Lost World genre. When I was younger, that was a big genre of film and television that I like to watch. It's something that my mother really enjoys, and it's something that her father really enjoyed, so I was always around that sort of media. Indeed, that's kind of one of the reasons that I wanted to go to this book and see where it all sprouted from. And I think that I was also feeling something of this connection to this novel because I know that it was one that my grandfather had read. I don't know whether he enjoyed it. I was too young when he died to ever speak to him about this book. But I was also feeling like this universal kinship sort of scenario because next Tuesday marks 23 years since he died. And I was thinking, well, maybe it's time to finally get around to this book that I have imagined for years that he enjoyed, but I never know. As I said when I started this book, I don't know why he stopped reading at page 53, or even if he did stop reading at page 53. This edition was printed in 1996, so there is every chance that that's how long he had it and never made it further than page 53. There's also every chance he read it, didn't like it, and left it in the office at my grandparents' house. I have no idea. And so I was having this sensation like part of me wanted to unhaul the book immediately due to these battle sequences where within the first like a few sentences about this battle, we're being told that about 3,000 people have died on one side and 2,000 on the other. And then by the time this battle's finished, on one side they'd lost 20,000, and it doesn't tell you how many they lost on the other side. And I thought that this was supposed to be a lost civilization. How does a lost civilization have tens of thousands of people that nobody knows about? Maybe that was possible in the Victorian era. I don't know. I understand, they were finding a lot of things and colonising that they, the white people were finding and colonising a lot of things that they didn't know about and people they didn't know were there. But goodness me, I appreciated the plain language and the way that the narrator told you from the off that he was going to write plainly. And I appreciated that this was a fast book to read. There were some moments in here that I enjoyed, and those were the moments when they were finding the lost world and they were giving information about long lost gods and goddesses, and there was some of this mysticism happening, and I really enjoyed that. But when I mentioned to my friend Joy I was reading this, she said that when she was at school this was seen as a boys' book, and I can definitely see that a certain type of reader, definitely like mid-20th century when she was having to read this for school, would have wholeheartedly adored the idea behind this as an adventure novel. But modern sensibilities as they are, and probably just being a decent human being, I kind of can appreciate where this book was coming from, and I can appreciate that H. Rider Haggard didn't necessarily consider himself a racist, especially when he outright says in the beginning of this book about not using a certain piece of racist terminology and why throughout the novel he chooses to use a different word. But then at the same time, you have him falling into colonialist ideas, speaking about black people in a certain fashion, speaking about African people in a certain fashion, that while he might not have thought it was racist at the time, is definitely racist. That was a difficult one to navigate as a modern reader, recognising where this book was coming from, but also recognising that it was still uncomfortable to read. I've never been a fan of the novels where it's like all out battles all of the time. I think I prefer the sense of discovery and wonder that comes from an adventure novel as opposed to constant fighting and battling. And maybe that was one of the things where at the time maybe there was this idea that if you didn't know it you just killed it and worried about it later. But it was a difficult one for me. Ever since the killing of the elephants in chapter 4, and then the killing of all these different animals, and then the killing of each other, and just the senseless death that felt like it was hitting you over the head every flaming second. They supposedly killed 20,000 people in over 3 days, and I'm just like, I can't be doing with it. I am glad to have read it because there's now no longer this mystery surrounding this book that I have held on to for years, that maybe it was going to be something it wasn't. And, I'm kind of glad that I don't have to discuss this with anybody within my family because nobody in this house is going to be reading it. Nobody's going to care about this book, within my family, I mean. So I'm quite happy to say it's done. I might never read H. Rider Haggard again, even though there are some books of his that I have been interested in, especially when I think about where they might stand in the origins of fantasy fiction. I'm more than happy just to let that slide and leave him for a while. I read up on who the author was. I know their intentions and everything, but it's just there was simply too much in this book that I didn't like, taking into account that I am in 2025 reading a book that came out over a century ago and reflects the ideas and sensibilities of the time. Even with that, it's the senseless violence, it's the way that women are portrayed and talked about. It is very masculine fighting narrative, and I don't much go in for that sort of fiction. So it was never going to be a book for me, but I'm aware there are many people who are fans of this book, able to recognise the era in which it was written and still move on and read more by the author, but I am just not one of them. I'm going to end this vlog here today, and next week's video might be somewhat different because should everything go well, I am travelling to Whitby for my annual pilgrimage on Monday, and I am planning on taking a piece of modern fiction to read if I get any reading done. However, I will be taking Lady Audley's Secret by Mary Elizabeth Braddon to read because I've heard that this is a sensation novel. I've heard it's a rather fast read and I've been meaning to get to it for a few years now. But over the weekend, starting today, I've already read 40 pages, but I want to catch up with Hester by Margaret Oliphant. This is the group read for Victober, and I know that a lot of people have been reading 2 chapters a day, and then on the final, whatever they're going to read, 3 chapters and finish it off by a certain date. I ain't about that life. I need to read hefty chunks all at once. So my plan is to perhaps read 120 pages today and then try and read another 120 by the end of day Sunday. That'll bring me, I think in this edition, catches me up to where everyone will be on Sunday, and then when I return from Whitby I will take a look at it again and read another vast chunk. And then another thing that I want to do is just read one of the classic crime stories in this little collection that was edited by David Stewart Davis. And I'm either going to go to The Blue Carbuncle by Arthur Conan Doyle or Markheim by Robert Louis Stevenson. I've also seen a short story in the Elizabeth Gaskell collection that I want to read, but I might leave that till the end of the month because I've heard it's rather eerie, and you know me, sometimes I'll try and go for something eerie around that supposedly eerie part of the month. Anyway, that's me. If you would like to discuss anything I've talked about in this video, then please feel free to do so in the comments. We can have a friendly debate, discussion, everything about King Solomon's Manners. If you're a fan, let me know. If you have any other books within that genre that you think that I might enjoy, then please let me know about them as well. I hope that you have enjoyed this video because, until next time, that is all.